So the world just hit 8 billion people, or at least that's what the headlines say. But let's be real for a second. Who's actually doing the counting? Are we just trusting that someone, somewhere, has a giant spreadsheet with everyone's name on it? Today we're talking about where those big population numbers actually come from. How accurate are they really? And why it all matters more than you think. Because behind that giant number is a mix of science, guesswork, politics, and a whole lot of missing data. Today, we are diving into the messy world of world population numbers. Who's counted, who's missed, and why it's not as straightforward as it sounds.
Welcome to the Retrospect podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Jason.
Hello, everyone.
And today we're down a man.
Yeah, Stoney had a little, a family matter he had to take care of, and so he told us to carry on, and he'll join us on the next one. Yeah. So we wish him well and hope everything's okay. Yeah. And we will catch back up with him next week. So it's just us two.
Mm-hmm. We have a nice, again, as we said before, we have a nice round table, and the table feels a bit.
Yeah, I think you and I have done this before.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah, when Stoney went through his I believe his injury.
Yeah,
there was some episodes we had to do ourselves. So, the podcast will be lacking.
Yes.
Because everybody, he's a valuable member of this podcast, and it's his presence is missed when he's not here. So
even if his jokes are sometimes corny,
they
still make me laugh.
I know. He has a way, me. I get so serious with everything, and I'm sitting here running my mouth, and all of a sudden Stoney spits out something. He's looking at me. I'm like, he just made a joke, didn't he? Yeah. So he's got a great way of diffusing the situation and kind of bring it back to an even keel. So
and I was actually kind of excited because I wanted to get his take on this episode. So maybe at some point in the future I can ask him. I had specifically requested or had threw out the idea for this episode. Kind of with him in mind a little bit, because I know he talks a lot about conspiracy theories and how they're up so many to none. You know how he is.
Oh yeah.
And so I thought about this. I was like, this sounds like a fun conspiracy. I think he would get a little.
Oh, I'm sure he would. I'm sure he would.
And that was a cool intro, by the way. I did like that. It was very clever. I actually didn't listen to that until we pushed record. So that was really fun.
Yeah, it's a. Now that I've kind of made it known, I like to kind of have a kind of a formal opening kind of statement on the topic we're going to be talking about, and that way kind of lets people know, okay, this is what this whole conversation is going to be about, and then of course Tony's always doing a great job with the closing statement, and he's so we won't have that. That. I'm not going to try to intrude on that.
Neither will I.
And we will just end it like we have in the past.
Right.
And we'll save that for when he comes back.
We have a big episode planned. I don't want to spoil it, but I'm really hoping that everything kind of works out, because I really want to hear what he has to say about that big topic coming up. So I think
that's going to be interesting. We've really kind of made a point. I know we've kind of all round tabled these topics. What would people be interested in basically tuning into us for an hour?
Yeah.
To hear about, and there's so much information on YouTube because everybody's doing the same thing. Because there's so many. There's only so many topics, and you have a plethora of YouTubers out there doing doing some great work.
Right.
And
How do we put our spin on it?
And yeah, how do we put our spin on it, and how do we present it to people that we know who are listening to our show? And it may make them go, I probably didn't know about that, you
Right.
know, because unless you let's be honest, unless you have some genuine interest in this kind of sometimes this weird stuff, and
Right.
It's difficult to even life is busy enough for many people, and I don't have time to deal with all that.
Right.
So we do our best to just let people kind of know about these things, and
Right.
if they want to do some more digging on their own, then okay, well, let me go find out about this. So
Right.
you never know. So, but yeah, we're going to talk about world population numbers and
Right.
just how accurate are they?
I was listening to a different podcast, and they had kind of brought this up as like a joking thing, like a joking conspiracy, and I didn't really think anything of it at the time until like they started expanding upon it just a little bit, and I did some digging myself, and I was like, oh wow, this is actually like a little bit more of like an actual like conspiracy theory than I thought it was just like a little joke thing they were talking about.
Right.
I didn't think they were being honest, and so anyways, like that's kind of what got me interested in putting it, because I feel like it also fits squarely in our kind of our wheelhouse a little bit.
Well,
So,
I mean, I was kind of watching some videos on it. I'll be honest with you, I've never really paid that much attention to the idea of world population numbers.
Me either.
As I said, 8 billion. How accurate that is, I just kind of assume that that's just how many human beings are on the planet. Whether
Right.
that's an accurate number, according to what I've seen, a lot of those numbers are actually pretty good. I'm surprised that they're confident to 1 to 3%.
oh wow,
Within the margin of error.
interesting.
So it's here in America, I mean, everybody's heard of the Census Bureau.
Yes.
Right. So, everybody knows they come knock on your door every decade. They do a census by law. So, of course, from that's what determines pretty much everything, how we organize our society. So, your representatives, your senators, voting boundaries, aid you receive. I mean, it goes into determining health policy, just a variety of different things that you don't even think about,
Right.
are based upon these numbers that they come up with.
Yeah.
So I've always taken the census very serious. When it comes in, I fill it out. When they come to my door, I'm more than happy to talk to them.
I know there's like what feels like a large percent of the population that doesn't like the census. They get like really defensive about it.
There's some people that don't want people to know they exist.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Kind of reminds me of a friend of mine that for years he never wanted anybody to take a picture of him.
Really?
Very
Okay.
bizarre.
I know that for some religious beliefs, like that kind of could.
It was something. I don't know what was wrong with him, but yeah, he
Okay.
was just he had this fear of he didn't want to be on. Now he's on Facebook and stuff like that now,
Okay.
but there for a long time back, it was like, oh, don't take a picture of me. It's like you think you like the lens is going to like capture your soul or something.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I think that if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I think it's like the Amish people, I think, believe something like that.
Yeah, he
That's a
wasn't.
big
He
thing.
wasn't Amish.
No, I'm just saying. I've heard that before.
Right.
I think it was a lot to do with.
Yeah,
There's a religious thing about
I
it.
get it, and it's just what it is. I mean, I'm not one to if that's what his wishes are, that's his wishes, and we always kind of joked about it, but
Right.
it's just what it is. But
Right.
the fact of the matter is, we can't get away from this planet we live on, and we need to be accounted as either one of the living or one of the dead.
Right. Especially like you said, whenever this whole census thing dictates a lot to do with, things
Well, yeah,
in
I
your
mean,
area.
in a stable country like in the United States, it's very easy to really conduct census, surveys and follow ups and
Right.
What they use. I know the Census Bureau, they use some of the official titles I saw as detailed surveys, statistical sampling, and follow-up visits are the three primary methods that are used by the U.S. Census Bureau to determine the population of the United States.
When was the last one that was done?
Well, I mean,
don't
we're
remember.
in 2025, so it would have been in 2020.
Oh, really?
So in
Okay.
2030,
Oh, wow.
we'll have another census.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So it's every 10 years in the United States.
Right.
I think that's kind of baked into the law.
Okay.
But now, when we're talking about the world,
Mm-hmm.
now you're talking about a whole different ball game,
Right.
especially in countries that are very unstable,
Yeah.
war torn, and stuff like that. So, in those cases, like for example, the UN Population Division, the World Health Organization, they do these sampling of people to get these numbers, and 8 billion human beings on the planet.
Right.
They basically use statistical models to fill in the blanks where they have to fill in the blanks.
Right.
They blend data from census, surveys, registration systems, and believe it or not, which I found pretty interesting, the satellite data.
Really?
Yeah. From that, they can estimate births, deaths, and migration.
Oh, over satellite data?
Yeah, with satellite data.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Now, of course, some of the, that's they have now, especially with LiDAR and stuff like that, they can determine now population density in a certain area.
Really?
Yeah, because they're looking at
Right,
the
yeah.
sky. So whereas before, maybe if a human being couldn't get in there, but all of a sudden satellite data shows there's a bunch of people there. And
Yeah.
I can estimate about how many people are there.
Wow.
So they can get their numbers approximate.
Right.
Is it going to be 100%? Yeah,
no.
it'll never be, because
course.
there's no really possible way to do that.
Right. Whenever I was looking up some stuff, the claim that this kind of conspiracy theory was talking about is the government and global organizations like the UN and like UN and World Banks and things like that inflate population numbers to promote fear of overpopulation and justify climate agendas and centralized control and all that kind of stuff. That was like a thing I had heard. That was like the conspiracy theory aspect of it. Is it like there's like big organizations that like try to overinflate that number to like push their things
yeah,
or
I mean,
whatever,
there's
but-
all kind of, the challenges of determining world health numbers. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's just the nature of the beast. I mean, you got countries that haven't been able to have a census in decades.
Yeah.
I mean, multiple decades,
That's
simply because
crazy.
of war and
Mhm.
just you just can't get people in there to go and knock on huts or
Oh,
whatever the case may be, and that kind of stuff. But I mean, there's a few challenges. I mean, you're getting, as I said, incomplete data.
Right.
You got political manipulation. Some countries want to, manipulate the numbers because that determines foreign aid and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So when they go to these, come to the United States and can you give us money and stuff like that? We have X amount of people, and of course, all that is kind of factored in. The migration issues are very much a challenge because of these centers and where these people kind of gather, and where are they coming from, and all these other things. So it can make me very difficult. And there's also technology gaps.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, I mean, there's no clean 100% way of just counting every human being that exists on the planet.
Right.
But I mean, I was very impressed. If they're comfortable with their numbers to 1 to 3% of the margin of error, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Considering some of the remote places
Yeah.
on this planet.
Of course.
Because they got human beings that probably exist on every environment
Right.
you can that exist on planet Earth.
Right.
So,
Again, looking into what people are saying about this, they say that they believe that it's closer to 1 to 3 billion, and not the supposed 8 billion.
okay, so where
And that's- and so
that?
I couldn't find their like reasoning to justify that. I was just curious as to like, you're saying that, which I do agree with as well, that you're saying they have a margin of error of 1 to 3%, which is like, that's pretty incredible if it's
Yeah.
8 billion or close to, and they're saying it's potentially 1 to 3. Like that's a big jump of like what the conspiracy theory believes. Like
So,
to be actual.
let's. What is the conspiracy theory? So let's kind of dive into that a little
Okay.
bit. Where do you since you kind of really, picked this, so this obviously you found this very intriguing. So
Right.
I'm not very versed on the conspiracy aspects of the world population number.
Yeah.
I may have seen one or two, or kind of in passing. I
Right.
just what did you find? I mean, what's
Well, they're
kind of
saying
out
that-
there?
Again, some of the things that I was able to look up to find was they were saying that like there is I kind of wrote down some bullet points here that I looked up. Is one is a sparse land, like as an argument, is saying that like large areas of land, such as like Siberia or Australia or central United States, are sparsely populated, which they claim contradicts the idea of an overpopulated planet. Is like kind of like a little bit of that is that there's a large area of like a large amount of land that is not populated at all is like is one part of it, and then to second that is that they're saying that there's also like empty cities, that there are videos and photos of low foot traffic or empty cities, especially during the whole COVID thing, which that's a whole other subject there, that are cited as evidence that the population numbers are exaggerated across the board. There's a lot of like empty land masses of like no populated area, and then these big cities are not quite as populated as they're saying that they are. So like where is these talking points are coming up with is like that's some of those things of like these two things make it seem as though like the country isn't quite as populated as people are saying that it is, and it's benefiting their cause for fear or something like that. So
Well, yeah.
and they're saying that there's also like some birth and death rate manipulation. So some claim that they like the birth and death rates are fabricated to adjust to like fit a certain narrative or something for whatever reason. I also looked up the fact that you're talking about like satellite imaging. I didn't see the stuff with LiDAR like you were talking about, but they were saying that satellite imagery and data gaps are it doesn't show it doesn't like they're saying that like the I'm not seeing where they get their facts on this kind of stuff, but they're saying that the satellites aren't saying the correct data or whatever. And of course, they're saying the same thing like we've said before of like economic and political incentives. They claim that inflating population supports global aid, funding, and environmental policy agendas and stuff like that.
Well, I'm going to tell you another thing. Speaking of satellite data, I do know that they are also, of course, we've talked about this, AI.
Oh, yeah.
So AI is helping to, machine learning and stuff like that. So I think the technology is getting better. Well, they'll be able to do it now. I say in 2024, the UN's global population, they said it was about 8.1 billion.
Some of the stuff they were talking about as well is that like places like India and China are like make up, I think something like 3 to 4 of that billion by itself.
Oh yeah,
it's like the most populated place.
They have the. I think India now has overtaken China.
Right, but they were saying like these conspiracy theorists, I don't think believe that that's the case. That like they think those countries are more underpopulated than they say they are, because of probably political reasons or something. I don't actually know what their stance is on it, but that was some I thought. But some of the evidence, the evidence-based counterpoints that I'd also looked into is that like we talked about already, census and like regulation, like registration systems and things like that, I think do a good job of like gathering nationwide information, like at least in like our country. And of course they do like, demographic sampling and things like that. So it says that also I have here that it says like urbanization trends. It says that like houses more than half of the cities house more than half of the world's population. Urban density data, energy usage, and infrastructure development, as far as like traffic patterns and things like that, also say that like it kind of is the counterpoint to what they're saying about like cities not being as populated. Like there's actually like data across the board, not just in like numbers, but like in things like infrastructure and traffic and energy usage and things like that.
Yeah, I just did some searching here on some of the conspiracy theories here, and
Okay.
they list 5 of them here. Some of these might be familiar to some of our listeners, but it's one is population inflation theory. Okay, the claim here is governments and global organizations inflate population numbers to justify funding, control, or panic, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Believers say agencies like the UN or World Bank exacerbate population growth to push certain agendas, climate change policy, global aid. Critics argue that this overstates resource scarcity and global challenges to manipulate public opinion. Here it basically is saying there's really no credible evidence of intentional global population inflation. If anything, many developing countries undercount due to limited data collection tools, which I can considering where some of the places are that I can see where that happened. I could easily see that happening. Another one here is depopulation agenda, aka Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. I don't know if you saw anything on that one.
I have not.
Okay, this claim is a secret plan exists by global elites, the UN, World Economic Forum, to drastically reduce the world population through vaccines, sterilization, or manufactured crises.
I hear Stoney in that.
Yeah, that's a Stoney one right there. Stoney, we're throwing this one out to you. Often linked to Bill Gates, COVID-19 vaccines, or climate change policy.
I can hear Stoney right now.
Oh, he would be chiming in on this one big time. Some versions claim food supply manipulation, wars, or pandemics are tools for depopulation.
Yeah.
According to this, it just says, what is the reality? So these theories typically misinterpret UN sustainability goals. There's no evidence of an organized depopulation agenda. Public health and education policies that lower birth rates naturally are often misconstrued as population control. Now, we also heard of the one-child policy in China.
Yes.
For decades, that was what China used. That goes there kind of the way they organize their society.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, they're facing population collapse. And it's interesting. I did listen to a couple episodes, some TED Talks regarding this very issue.
Really?
Yes, of what these countries are now experiencing.
Wow.
And how that changes things. I mean, when you're going to have more old people than young people, okay.
In balance.
How does that balance out? And so there's a lot of talk right now. So I've been seeing a lot of people raising a lot of alarms right now on we have a population crisis. And the only way, for example, Canada, has managed to stave off this because unfortunately they've basically adopted a wide open border policy, which that brings a whole host of other problems when you do that. Instead of getting your native-born population to basically replace itself in more.
I think that Japan's doing something.
Japan's got a bad problem, too, because nobody wants to have kids.
That's what I'm saying. I think that they're like, what I'm saying is I think that they're trying to incentivize people to have kids. So like there's
I've watched some shows on that, on what's going on in Japan and what is it with women don't want to be married. And I think from what I've been able to pick up, because of the social kind of hierarchy and the roles of men and women in that society, it's very regimented, that a lot of Japanese women don't want to be kind of, as soon as she becomes a wife, she's almost she's locked down, so to speak, and where she doesn't leave the home, and it just her role changes. And a lot of Japanese women, at least from what I've seen, are out in the workplace, and they kind of like the freedom. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's why you see a lot of these men are leaving work, and they're not even going home to their wife. They're going to a brothel or a bar, and they stay there all night, or whatever the case may be, or they fooling around with somebody
Right.
else.
I get kind of nervous sometimes thinking about the future of like America in that same sense, because I feel like there's a large portion of my generation, at least from in my friend group, aren't having kids. They may be married, they may not be married, but they are or aren't having kids. I'm not sure that's a thing that's like ubiquitous across all of America or just in my context. But that's something as well that, again, I feel like there's a lot of young women, a lot of young men that are just pursuing their careers up into their 30s, and they're like, I don't want to.
Well, I can't say anything because, I don't have children.
Right.
And I'm a Gen Xer.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I was ever really opposed
Right.
to having a family. I'm not an anti-family person. I think family is very important. It was just other issues, just throughout my life, never really finding the partner that I was wanting, that I would do that with. But
yeah.
I can understand the fear with just simply the amount of money you have to make to clothe, feed, raise, be there for you. So I admire families in today's world that is so hard.
Right.
And but it's just we are in this country, and I think part of the reason why some of the open border stuff, and while we keep keeping this thing open like it was for so long. I mean, even just prior to, going back a decade, 20 years ago, we were still doing all this stuff, allowing these people come in, and I think the trends were showing just people were not having kids anymore. And I think part of that falls under the people wanting to not. I mean, I don't want to take away from my own comfort.
Yes.
Because look, the minute you have children, your life is effectively over. I mean, it just is. Your life becomes the child,
right? Or at least it should.
It has to be that way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a necessity. That's part of it. And I think people have gotten comfortable with, I want my money. I kind of got my thing going, and I'm comfortable, and I don't want to shake that boat. And unfortunately, I just think there's there are consequences. I mean, I think about it all the time as I age. I'm not going to have a family. I mean, eventually my mom and dad will be gone, and my sister will have her deal going, and and if I mean, of course now I'm dating someone, but if I wasn't, I mean, after I've been pretty honest, after my last relationship I had, I really was fixing to just accept getting old alone, and what that would mean. So
that's hard.
It's thinking about it at my age now than when I was, say, at 30. It's a totally different ball game,
of course.
And so I tell people all the time. I mean, like, family is great. Kids are wonderful. They really are. They're wonderful. They're a blessing. But understand it's going to be in our kind of our selfish world now. I mean, you got to put your needs in the back,
right?
And you're going to have to sacrifice. So I think
it's hard.
It's hard. Yeah. It's tough. But
and I think that, like, I mean, I'm in the same boat as well. Like, I've been in some relationships before that I'm like, I want to settle down one day and have children, and I think I've realized that may not be the other person in the relationship. It either does not want that or is not looking forward to that, and that's the kind of the reality of, like, well, that's kind of something I'd like to have one day. I think another talking point that I've seen brought up about this topic that we're on is the fact that, like, the trend of, like, the population trend number is, at least from what they say, is suspiciously going up pretty straight. Like it doesn't dip down at all. And so to have this conversation like we're talking about people now not having as many kids in many different countries, and like, you know, China having this population collapse that we're talking about, people in Japan not wanting to have children, people in America, like all, I think what kind of quote unquote reinforces this conspiracy theory is the fact that like there's all that talk of it all, but you look at the number and the number just keeps going up.
Right.
In a very linear fashion, in a very clean fashion. And so people are starting to think in that aspect of like, I think it's just skepticism. Everyone's just generally skeptic towards that for whatever, you know, it may mean and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think it doesn't help that social media platforms act as kind of a echo chamber, a thing where you can just have the same ideas as everyone else and people can reinforce what their beliefs are and that kind of stuff. But
right.
So
yeah, well, I'm kind of diving a little bit more into some of these conspiracies that I mentioned Agenda 21, Agenda 2030.
Yeah.
The UN document at its core, Agenda 21 was actually in 1992.
Really?
And Agenda 2030, it was in 2015, are non-binding United Nations action plans for sustainable development.
Okay.
They focus on things like reducing poverty, promoting gender equality, increasing access to education and clean energy, managing land and environmental resources responsibly. The conspiracy view of this, critics falsely claim these documents call for forced relocation, population reduction, and authoritarian control under the guise of sustainability. The truth, the documents explicitly support voluntary national level initiatives and respect for human rights. There's no call for depopulation or mass control. We all heard the vaccine stuff.
Of course.
The claim was the vaccine contained microchips, sterilizing agents, or a part of a depopulation plot. You know, why Bill Gates' name pops up with this all the time, because he's been very active in the global health kind of arena, funding some of that. I guess when you have all that money, you got to spend it on something.
I think he's been a big proponent of vaccines in a lot of ways, and so I think that's a big.
And I am not an anti-vaxxers. I know. People have some strong opinions on these.
Right.
I believe vaccines ultimately do save lives.
I think certain vaccines really do.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that, our ancestors would have rejected a polio vaccine.
Right.
I talked to people who got crippled and died from polio. They would probably tell you a little different. Right. They could take a shot and that would have been prevented. But I think where some of this Bill Gates stuff comes from, and I'm reading a quote here, it said a misinterpreted quote from a 2010 TED Talk is often cited.
Yes.
Gates said, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, and reproductive health services, we could lower population growth by 10 to 15%. What he meant to say was improved health leads to lower birth rates because parents don't feel the need to have many children to assure some survive, which would have been the case back when there was no medicine and mortality rate among children were very high because of just sickness. I mean, you can imagine how devastating an influenza would have been back then. I mean, I know just from my area around here, I've dug into some of the history of yellow fever outbreaks and just the masses of bodies that they were just thrown in a pit.
I grew up knowing my great-grandmother, and I think she was one of like 12 or 13 children, and some of them didn't make it.
That's right.
Or I think some of them may have, but like, same sort of thing. She was raised in 20s, 30s, 100 years ago, and it was a very different circumstance as opposed to right now.
Well, I mean, here's some, I like this here. They said real trends misused. They say the theory often exploits real data trends to support false conclusions. Okay, so here's a fact. Fertility rates are falling worldwide. The conspiracy misuse of that would be claimed as evidence of sterilization.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Vaccines reduce child mortality. The conspiracy misuse claim to cause infertility.
Right.
Governments plan smart cities or climate adaptation. The misuse of that seen as plans for population control. And I remember this kind of touches on the 5-minute city concept. If you remember, we talked about some of this kind of permeated that conversation at the time. And I'm a bit mixed. I understand looking at some of this data that the data is going to always dismiss the conspiracy theory because it's just, it's just the way people view it.
Of course.
But, there's always a kernel of truth.
Yes.
So things have to be taken with a grain of salt. I am not naive to think that there are some nefarious ideals that are behind some of this, because they are people who believe that there's only so many resources for X amount of people.
Right.
So, okay, we got to stop having quit having all these babies.
Right.
But
I say the same thing about sarcasm.
Right.
Good sarcasm always comes a little bit of truth in it.
Right.
That's usually that's the funniest. So I think it's the same thing. A lot of these conspiracy theories think have something in there, but
why does this? It's like, where does this all come from? Why do people have these conspiracy theories? And it just people observe the world around them, and things just don't make sense. Or it's like, I can think for myself, and what I'm seeing is not what you're presenting.
Right.
Or at least that's how I'm not interpreting it. So, but some of these examples of why people distrust elites and institutions, especially after the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Misinformation networks, social media now, it's, and alt news platforms. I got to be careful with that one because some of those alt news platforms were correct on some of this stuff, that we found out. So I don't necessarily buy that it's always that way,
right?
Historical abuses. Now, there have been attempts at doing this stuff, like for real, like eugenics and forced sterilizations, which create fear that it's happening again.
Right.
And then sometimes there's real government overreach in some cases, surveillance, urban policy that make the theory feel plausible.
Like I said, I still think, too, what you're saying before about, all these, the declining in population or the not having children. I think when you talk about all that and the numbers aren't lining up with it is where it's just that breeding ground, I think, for conspiracy theory is whenever people can look around them and see that whenever the talk of the town is the population's going down, but then the data says the population's at an all-time high right now. It's like, okay, so where is the miscommunication happening or what's the, I feel like conspiracy theory does, conspiracy theory explodes whenever there's unknown. Whenever you have some things that are fact, some things that are understood, and there's even just a little bit of unknown is where conspiracy theory will take off. And you look at any kind of conspiracy theory, there's that little bit. We unpacked JFK recently.
Yep.
No, but a few months ago, and you talk about a lot of facts, a lot of things that are happening that we've known throughout history, or at least what people think, but there's just enough unknown there for people to just
fill in the gaps.
Fill in the gaps.
Yep.
That's what it takes. I think that's what's happening here with this kind of stuff too. Is there's a lot of both and correlation, causation, whatever you want to consider what all this is going on, and there's just enough unknown where people are taking this and running with it. And sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it creates, I think, a fun conversation, and sometimes I think it's a cool idea. It got me thinking about this in a way that I never really thought about before. I never really considered world population numbers and what it all meant, and sometimes that's what I kind of like about conspiracy theories, is the ones that kind of make me think about things and really ask myself, what do I believe with some of this stuff? What do I think is the truth? And
there's so much stuff we just take.
Oh yeah,
we just take as is because there's only so much energy I have to devote my brain to to really try to understand something. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, I'm saying, life is busy. I got other stuff going on. So, okay, what those valuable minutes that I have in a day,
Right.
that I really don't have anything going on, where am I going to direct my mental energy at? And
Right.
so some of this stuff is just, kind of beyond the pale. And we don't, I mean, it's like, I'm just not going to worry about. And look, some people are just they're not, they don't kind of believe in now. They're kind of more grounded and more practical in their thinking, and that's fine. It takes a little bit of everybody to make the world go around. And I think it takes people that kind of entertains these things and thinks about them, and then you need people that basically say, I don't have time to think about all this stuff.
I think that's without me saying it directly, I think that's kind of the position I've taken on the show a little bit, is like I'm a little bit more of the skeptic, I guess. I'm not saying that you and Stoney believe everything, but like there's a couple times like you guys have like some things that you really enjoy talking about, or that you believe in or feel, and I'm like, I think I've noticed as the show has evolved over time that I kind of like where it's going, because Stoney is very much in the camp of this kind of stuff, and he's got his evidence that he points to. And his sources that he says, I've got a reason to believe this. Right.
I'm come somewhat in the middle on this. I don't. Sometimes some of this stuff is a little kooky.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm always open to the possibility that there are forces at work that want to bring some of this about.
Of course.
And so how that works. We talk about all that, and as I said, I think you probably are the biggest skeptic on the show, because I've just listened to you. Now I know you have your passions for like AI and
of course,
and how that applies in the creative world and stuff like that. But it's
I think in life sometimes the simplest answer is usually always the one that
was
people
that
go
Occam's razor.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so I do believe that, but I'm also kind of and I've said this numerous times in this show, I'm always willing to be wrong, because I've never claimed to know the correct answer. And there's been so many times where I have said I've felt a certain way, and a lot of times like you guys either come with facts or talking points and things like that. I'm like, okay, I leave this show feeling maybe a little bit different than I did before.
Right.
And I think that's fun. And I love.
Well, that's the whole point of it.
Of course,
it's to each kind of bring our own, what we find, and of course we always interpret through the lens of our own, of our own consciousness, and of course that's built upon our experiences, what we've read and what we listen to, kind of our predisposition on how we view the world.
Right. And as the youngest person on the show, I take that as like I don't know. I know Stoney pretty well, but I don't know all the things that he's done in his life, all the skeletons in the closet, all the thing, and what has led him to believe the things that he believes. And if I may have lived his life, I probably would agree 100%. And that's why I always am open and willing to hearing what he's got to say. Even you as well.
Yeah,
I know that there's
here's some pretty interesting things I've found here. The origins of the depopulation agenda theory.
Okay,
this is a pretty good. They actually provide some key historical milestones. So in the year 1798, Malthus publishes an essay on the principle of population.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the connection to the theory? It says, introduces the fear that overpopulation leads to catastrophe unless controlled. So this is all the way back in 1798.
Really?
Yeah. So in the 20th century, you got the eugenics movements in the U.S., Germany, and elsewhere. That's kind of where you get into the Nazi era.
Yeah.
And give real world examples of population control abuse, making future claims more believable. In 1972, Limits to Growth. This is put out by the Club of Rome.
Okay.
This is one of these like Illuminati type groups.
Yeah.
Warns of overpopulation, resource collapse, later misquoted by conspiracy theorists. In 1992, the UN's Agenda 21, adopted at the Earth Summit in Rio. It becomes the centerpiece of later globalist control theories. I remember that when that came
Really?
out. Yeah, I do remember that. Now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't even remember reading about some of the stuff in 72 by the Club of Rome.
Really?
Yeah, I remember reading about some of that in the 80s.
Wow. That's fascinating.
And in the 2000s to 2010s, you got the rise of Alex Jones, InfoWars, and alternative media.
Yeah.
Heavily promoted the idea that climate change, vaccines, and global governance are tools of population control.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 2020 and onward, COVID-19 pandemic and vaccine rollout, theories about microchips, sterilization, and pandemic explode globally. And of course, I mean, who are some of the, the biggest, you mix all this together. You got anti-vaccine activism, anti-globalist sentiment, anti-environmentalism, and then let's not forget the biggest, which dominates. I have found that people that fall within this group espouse those things I just said the most.
Really? I mean,
and
that makes sense.
Religious subgroups.
Really?
Like evangelicals. Within the evangelical end time narratives. End of the world. I have found.
So you're saying like the Venn diagram.
That if you had a group where these sort of beliefs seem to kind of aggregate.
Yeah.
It's within these subgroups, and religious groups is one of them.
Wow.
Which that makes sense to me because everybody I know that's anti-vax,
yes,
is generally are evangelicals, and it's the tool of the devil and stuff like that. So I can see why that data shows that. And as I said, I'm just reading what the data is showing of why certain groups believe certain things and kind of where that falls in that on the skew, so to speak, on the chart.
You didn't even have to finish the sentence. I know exactly what you're going to say because I was like, I came from an evangelical kind of like Christian, like non-denominational background, and so that's a very I've seen that trend.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like if I had to just take two, if I had to take just say Catholics,
yes,
what percentage of the population that would espouse these beliefs the most? And evangelicals, it's a greater percentage of evangelicals are going to exhibit these things than you'll find in the general Catholic population. So it's just the way it works. I think like-minded people kind of by nature congregate together.
Yes.
And
what's the old phrase? Birds of a feather.
Birds of a feather flock together.
There you are.
You believe that way. I believe that way. Oh, we're friends. So,
exactly.
But if you don't believe that, then it's kind of sometimes I don't know where you stand with this stuff.
Of course.
So what are some of the common psychological drivers? Need for control.
Oh yeah.
It's in uncertain times, like pandemics, wars, economic shifts, conspiracy theories give people a sense of explanation.
Yes.
It does. And, when we're fearful, I want to be able to put a box around it and be able to identify it.
Oh,
and that's kind of our way of coping with that. I mean,
and I think we've already talked about this before, or a little bit, is the idea of conspiracy theories thriving in that unknown space. I think it's also conspiracy theories, I think, thrive because of that, of wanting to make what's unknown and put it in a box and contain it, or give it an answer, make it something that, like, instead of just like this unknown, because I feel like people don't usually work well with unknowns. They like to have some things answered, some definitives. So I think you're right, of like, even if they have to fabricate the box themselves to put it in, that's what they're going to do.
Well, I mean, we've been talking about depopulation, the depopulation agenda. We'll bring up a third one here. underpopulation reality. Now, this one, the claim is the real global concern is not overpopulation, but declining fertility and population collapse, which is what I mentioned earlier, which I've seen a few videos on, and about that concern, which governments are hiding.
Right.
Often shared by groups worried about Western demographic decline, e.g., declining birth rates in Europe, Japan, South Korea. So, in democracies, established democracies, it seemed like, having people bringing, having babies, and it seems like, which makes sense to me in areas that are underdeveloped. You once again, you're trying to have more babies because of who's going to survive, and you're playing your odds.
As we talked about already too, of like, an aging population, having younger people to like step up into the workforce to help like, sustain those older generations as well. That whole discussion as well, which I never really thought about when I was younger, and even talking about this now, like I've started to think about it more about like Social Security and things like that, and how like there's a system that takes place when there's an overwhelming majority of people in a certain age bracket, and there's a dwindling population of the younger, like the newer workforce of like, it's a very unbalanced system of like one's taking a lot and the other portion's not giving, and so I can imagine.
Yeah, this is like, the reality here is fertility is dropping in many places, and some countries face population decline. But it doesn't negate growth in others, like Africa.
Yeah.
Population trend is complex, and I don't believe there's much of a cover up. But
there's a lot of good sci-fi media that I think talks about like sterilization, or maybe not sci-fi, but like post-apocalyptic type stuff,
right?
Of that kind of medium of like sterilization in some way. And
that was a movie about.
I can't remember
what movie. There was a movie with the actor Adrian Paul.
Okay.
And he played, and just put, no babies or something like that.
The Void? I don't know. Yeah. Children of Men?
Children of Men.
Oh, I think I do know that
That's it.
I do. I watched. Okay,
Children of Men.
Yes, I watched that for the other podcast that I do as well. Children of Men. Yeah, that's That's what that movie's about, I recall. Okay, that must be what I was thinking about. Dystopian future where humanity faces extinction due to widespread infertility.
Yep.
Scary.
Yeah. You need to, if you want to watch a movie on that stuff, that's a good one to watch.
Yeah.
It was kind of a dark movie.
Oh, yeah. I think it was also like a war breaks out or something, or there's something anyways. I think I just remember the concept of this, of like, infertility or sterilization or something causing something big in like either sci-fi / dystopian type media, which I think is a fun premise. So
right, yeah. So check it out. It's a pretty good movie though, but it's not the most. It's not going to make you feel good when you finish watching the show, and a lot of people are like, I don't want to watch a movie like that.
Yeah.
Okay, another. Conspiracy here is phantom populations. The claim is certain countries, notably China or India, massively inflate their census data to appear more powerful on the world stage.
Yeah.
Claim motives include increased influence in the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, or global trade. So while some inaccuracies exist, especially in rural and undercounted regions, independent demographers generally validate these numbers with multiple methods, i.e. satellite data and household surveys. So, we've kind of touched on that.
Right.
And the last one here that I see, it's population control via technology. Governments or corporations use digital tools, e.g. surveillance, social media, 5G, as part of a eugenics-inspired population control program. Sometimes merged with theories about digital ID systems or social credit systems like in China.
Oh, yeah.
So these claims conflate surveillance and privacy concerns with unfounded ideas about depopulation or covert sterilization. So
That was what again talking about the China and India thing, talking about like overinflating their population numbers. At first, I was kind of confused as to why they would do something like that. But I think I'm understanding a little bit better now why that would be the case. But that was like one of the big talking points that whenever I was doing listening to people talk about it some more was the fact that they were like overinflating their numbers. Again, I think whenever you add the two up, it makes a little less than half of the world's population, and people were saying like, I don't believe that's true. And I was like, well, I don't know. I've never actually been there. I know it's what it seems like a very densely populated two countries, but so.
Yeah, like for example, in this one, this population via technology, they say governments, corporations, or global elites are using or planning to use technology to monitor, manipulate, and ultimately reduce or control the human population. Some of these technology platforms, 5G networks, radiation harms fertility or mental health, digital ID systems, it tracks and control movements, access to services, smartphones and apps, surveillance and behavior manipulation, biometrics and facial rec, identify and target dissidents or control populations, social credit systems, enforce obedience or penalize undesirable lifestyles, AI, mass behavior prediction or selection of who should survive, and then vaccines and microchips, injects tracking devices or infertility agents.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, some of these things I just kind of want to talk about here, like, because believe me, there was a lot of it in the news and still is regarding 5G and the radiation fear. If you remember with the towers going up, and they're probably going to keep going up. So the question is, even Brandon, our friend that came on, talked about, now, you're getting into the spectrum now where you can interact with some of this supposedly wetware that's in our body. They said basically some of the fears of this, it causes infertility, it weakens immune systems, it's linked falsely to COVID-19, sterilizes or mutates people slowly. Whether that's true or not, who knows? I don't think they know enough yet to basically dismiss it outright.
Right.
They say in reality, 5G uses non-ionizing radiation, which is not powerful enough to damage DNA. They say dozens of studies and reviews, World Health Organization and the ICNIRP, I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's an acronym for something, but it's ICNIRP, find no credible evidence that 5G harms fertility or health.
It's the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection.
Okay. These fears are rooted in scientific illiteracy and often amplified by disinformation actors. Of course, this is the next one that we've all heard of, digital IDs and the mark of the beast fears.
Oh, yeah.
Digital identity systems like India's Aadhaar or proposed digital wallets in Europe are accused of enabling constant surveillance, being precursors to cashless control grid, and matching apocalyptic religious ideas, mark of the beast. Of course, now I have a bit of a nuanced way of looking at this. I do believe that this technology has a strong potential to be abused,
right,
and into the hands of the wrong people could be used to, in essence, take away freedoms. I really do. So I am not necessarily dismissive of some of the concerns that this technology grants. While I believe technology ultimately is used, or the initial design is to help.
Right.
It's only as good as the wisdom of its creators and handlers.
All right.
And if people have bad motives, then technology is a neutral platform. It can be used for bad stuff too.
I've said the same thing about AI too. Is it's a tool, and I think it could be used for good and for bad. So, but yeah.
Yeah, so digital IDs aim to improve access to services and reduce fraud, which I agree. Surveillance risks exist, but are technical and political issues, which I said go back to the wisdom of the handlers, not evidence of a depopulation plan. And religious framing often weaponizes such skepticism, which I can understand that. I said people are always looking at the world around them. Things are kind of crazy. I don't know how to explain this. So it's sometimes it can be easy. While I'm not dismissive of the idea, because I myself believe in religion and in the spiritual and kind of that old good versus evil type of. I'm very much on board with that. I believe some of it can be kind of overplayed. So you gotta wisdom is in the beholder. And the China factor, real or versus exaggerated. Much of this theory draws from China's real social credit system and mass surveillance, which they do over there. China uses facial recognition, data tracking, and AI to monitor citizens. Certain behaviors, e.g., paying bills late, can restrict travel or services.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Now, I could tell you how that would play here.
Oh, it would not.
Conspiracy theorists argue this system is to be exported or copied worldwide. It's a dry run for a global population control. Well, I mean, if they're using it, I can see how it could be used. The text there, it can be used.
Right.
As I said, it goes back to the wisdom of your your leaders. The Chinese system is real, but it's not entirely unified or omnipotent, which, of course, but could it be, could AI, could AI make it a lot more robust?
Of course.
Can. They said, and Western countries don't have anything close in scope. They could if they wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, supercomputers exist. And we all talked about quantum computing.
Oh, yes.
And how that could easily, as I said, you marry quantum computing with AI, I think you've reached Skynet, and you've now, you've got computers that are smarter than any human being on the planet. Matter of fact, I was listening to an interview with Elon Musk. I think he was talking to Senator Ted Cruz from Texas and another gentleman about, where do you see AI in 10 years? He said, well, 10 years, they'll be smarter than any human on the planet.
Right.
That's not that long in the future.
No.
These claims became especially widespread during COVID-19. Vaccines that contain microchips, often links to Bill Gates and tracking. Nanotech and shots will control thoughts or fertility. Transhumanism. We did an episode on it. It's a step toward eliminating humanity altogether and replacing it with an AI hybrid elites. Of course, here it says there's no vaccine contains a chip or tracking devices. I don't know, maybe or maybe not. I'm not willing to just categorically deny that. Transhumanism is a philosophical movement, not a hidden agenda. Take that with a grain of salt too, because I do believe that's a desire.
Right.
These beliefs often stem from misinterpretations of real biotech research, i.e., nanomedicine or neural implants like Neuralink.
It's interesting. It's a cool topic that, like I said, I stumbled across, and I thought it'd be fun for us to try and find our way through. And I think I'm curious now. I want to try and talk with Stoney and just get his opinion on it, because
he would have had some good stuff to say about this one.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to what his input is, and I can't wait to talk to him about it. With that being said, you know how to reach out to us. We have the email address, getinfinitytogether@gmail.com. You have comment sections on the platforms on YouTube and on Spotify. We have the website as well, retrospectpod.com. And until next week, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless.